The Young and the Restless spoilers. Nat's escape didn't feel like freedom. Not really. It felt like being pushed out of a burning building with your skin already blister-ringolive. Yes, but marked, hunted, and furious at the fact that you had to keep running. He had slipped away from Nick and Victor on instinct and spite, fueled by the humiliating truth that he had miscalculated how quickly the walls could close in when Newman money and Newman loyalty decided you were a problem to be erased. The minutes after his getaway were not triumphant, they were feral. He was alone, bruised by the fight he'd barely survived, and he could taste the bitter metal of panic in the back of his throat. Somewhere behind him were two men who had the kind of strength that didn't only come from muscles or rage, but from the certainty that the world usually bent their way. Nick could take a punch and give one back with interest. Adam could look at you like you were already defeated and make it true. Matt had learned a harsh rule in that chase. Confronting them head-on was suicide. If he wanted to hurt them, if he wanted to win, he had to stop trying to be stronger and start being smarter. And smarter meant crueler. It meant choosing a battlefield where their power didn't translate as easily, where their fists and bravado and old family intimidation became useless. So his mind, always opportunistic when cornered, moved toward the people they would not expect him to target first. The people they would hesitate for. The people whose pain would echo into Nick's and Victor's lives like a siren that never stopped. Women. Not because women were weak, but knew better than to mistake resilience for fragility, but because men like Nick and Victor were conditioned to believe they could protect women if they just arrived in time. Matt's plan wasn't to fight strength with strength. It was to fight strength with guilt, with fear, with consequences. And no one in Genoa City carried a more dangerous collection of secrets in her heart than Sharon. Sharon was the kind of woman who had learned how to keep walking even after life had knocked her flat. She had stared down scandal, betrayal, grief, and the slow poison of other people's lies. And she had survived long enough to become confident in something that most people never earned, the belief that fear didn't get to decide her choices. She moved through the city like someone who had made peace with being watched. She took her errands, her meetings, her quiet moments of thinking in cafes or parking lots, without that constant nervous glance over her shoulder that so many people wore like a permanent accessory. She told herself that if danger existed, she would sense it. She told herself that she knew the patterns of men who hunted and the tactics of men who threatened. She told herself she'd been through worse. And it was almost true until you realized the most lethal trap wasn't the one you saw coming, but the one built around your certainty. Sharon held too much of Matt's story, too many pieces of his behavior that didn't fit the image he sold when he wanted sympathy. She knew names he didn't want repeated, situations he had twisted to make himself the victim, and the specific kind of darkness that crept out when he believed no one was paying attention. She hadn't exposed him yet, partly because Sharon was cautious and partly because she understood how accusations could ricochet back and wound the person who made them. She wanted proof, something firm enough to stand up against the kind of denial Matt weaponized so effortlessly. She thought she had time. She thought silence was a temporary strategy. To Matt, her silence was not mercy, it was a threat, a loaded gun she had simply chosen not to fire. He didn't trust that choice. He didn't trust anything about Sharon's calm. It made him feel small, and in Matt's world, feeling small always demanded revenge. The first time he saw her that day, he didn't approach. He didn't confront. He watched from a distance with the patience of someone who had been forced to evolve. His injuries ached, but anger was a powerful anesthetic. He waited for the moment she was alone, the moment the rhythm of her day made her predictable, and he followed her to the place that always gave him the advantage, the private interior of her car. That small, enclosed space where even the strongest person could become helpless if the right hands reached from the right angle. He chose timing like a surgeon chooses a scalpel. When Sharon parked, when she stepped away for only minutes, when her mind was elsewhere checking a message, looking for her keys, thinking about all the reasons she refused to be afraid, Matt moved. Quiet, fast, and viciously calm. He slipped into the back seat like smoke, collapsing himself into the shadows, slowing his breath, letting the thud of his heartbeat become a distant background noise. The car smelled faintly of Sharon's perfume and something clean, something domestic, the scent of a life that still believed in routine. It made Matt's hatred spike because routine was a privilege he no longer had. He waited. He listened to the world outside the glass, muffled and indifferent. And then the driver's door opened, the seat dipped, Sharon's familiar movements returned to their usual positions, and the engine turned over. For a few seconds, Matt remained nothing but a presence in the dark. Sharon adjusted mirrors, buckled, pulled out, the city sliding past in daylight like everything was normal. That normality was the final insult. The moment the car merged into a stretch of road where there were fewer eyes, fewer immediate witnesses, Matt rose behind her like a nightmare that had been traveling with her the whole time. Sharon saw him in a reflection first, just a flicker. A shape that didn't belong, and her body reacted before her mind fully understood. Her hands tightened on the wheel, her breath caught, and then Matt's arm hooked around her neck from behind with brutal precision. His forearm crushed into her throat, cutting off air, cutting off the sound that might have become a scream. It was the kind of hold designed not just to kill, but to terrify. Sharon's instincts fought back immediately. She clawed at his arm, her nails scraping skin, her legs tensing as if she could kick him off through sheer force of will. But the angle was wrong, the leverage was his. And the panic rose like water in her lungs. Her eyes widened as the world narrowed into a tunnel of choking pressure and flashing road. The car swayed. The lines on the pavement blurred. Sharon tried to keep control, but control was the first thing panic stole. The steering wheel jerked beneath her grip as her body struggled for oxygen and her mind screamed at her to survive. The vehicle veered, corrected, veered again, tires crying out against asphalt. And in that split second when Sharon's strength faltered, when her vision darkened at the edges and her hands lost the exact precision needed to keep to tons of metal steady, everything broke. The car struck something, maybe the edge of the road, maybe a bump at the wrong speed, and the impact turned the vehicle into a spinning cage. Glass exploded. Metal shrieked. The world flipped. Sharon's body slammed against restraints, pain blooming across her shoulder and ribs like fire. The car rolled once, twice, and then landed upside down with a final violent shudder that made the air vibrate. Silence followed for a heartbeat, the eerie kind that comes after catastrophe, before the crackle began. Smoke. The sharp smell of gasoline. A spark that shouldn't have happened but did. Flames licking at the underside like eager tongues. Sharon hung inverted, blood rushing to her head, her breath shallow and ragged as her throat burned from Matt's grip and her chest tightened with shock. Somewhere in that wreckage, Matt groaned. He had been thrown forward in the chaos, slammed hard enough that for a moment even his hatred seemed stunned. But he came back to himself with a predator's urgency. Pain wasn't unfamiliar. Injury wasn't new. He forced his limbs to obey, felt heat building fast, realized the car was turning into an oven. Survival was the only instinct he trusted more than revenge. He fumbled for the door, for a window, for any exit that wasn't blocked by twisted metal. And with a raw grunt he shoved himself toward the opening where daylight still existed. He crawled out first, dragging himself over glass and gravel, coughing as smoke burned his throat, his shirt catching the edge of flame and then tearing away as he yanked free. He rolled on the ground to put out the heat, then pushed up on trembling arms, staggering as he gained distance from the wreck just as the fire surged brighter. For a moment, he looked back. Not with remorse, not with shock at what he had done, but with calculation, versing the scene, measuring time, measuring what it would mean if Sharon died there. Part of him wanted it. Part of him understood the value of leaving her alive but broken. A living warning to Nick and Victor that Matt could reach into their world anytime he pleased. Yet the fire didn't negotiate, and the sounds Sharon made from inside a strained, trapped, desperate terror, not the sounds of a woman who could simply unbuckle and crawl out. Sharon's seatbelt held her like a restraint. The inverted position disoriented her. Pain shot through her side every time she moved. The cabin was filling with smoke, and the heat was rising so fast it felt like the air itself was turning solid. She reached for the buckle with shaking hands, fingers slipping, mind screaming at her to focus, to find the release, to ignore the blood pulsing in her ears. Her hair fell into her face, sticky with sweat. Her throat throbbed with every swallow. She tried again, yanked, and the latch refused at first, jammed by impact. Sharon's fear sharpened into something colder, clarity. This was not just an accident. This was a trap that had become a catastrophe. She could picture Nick's face when he found out. She could imagine Victor's quiet, lethal rage. She could feel Adam's fury turning into action. And that knowledge, this stubborn certainty, that the people who loved her would not let her be erased became the fragile thread she wrapped around her mind to stop it from collapsing. She forced herself to breathe in shallow, controlled bursts to avoid inhaling too much smoke. She pressed her back against the seat to create leverage. She pulled at the buckle again, harder, until pain flashed white behind her eyes. The latch clicked, not fully, but enough to loosen. Sharon dropped an inch, her body jolting as gravity reclaimed her, and she caught herself with an agonized gasp. The movement made the smoke rush in faster. Outside, the fire roared like an animal waking up. Matt, already limping away, heard the sound and knew the ending was writing itself whether he watched it or not. He didn't go back. He didn't reach in. He didn't do the one heroic thing that might have rewritten how anyone would tell this story later. He chose himself because that's what he always chose, even when he pretended otherwise. He disappeared into the distance, wounded but free, leaving behind a burning car and a woman fighting for her life in a cage of flipped steel. Sharon's hands scrambled for the window controls, but the power was dead. She shoved at the glass, but it didn't give. Her mind raced through options: kick, break, crawl, anything while the heat thickened, pressing on her skin, stealing oxygen, turning every breath into a gamble. She found a small pocket of air near the floor, now above her, and twisted to angle her face toward it, coughing until her ribs screamed. The firelight flickered through cracks, painting the interior with violent orange. Sharon's thoughts came in jagged fragments. The secrets she'd kept, the warnings she'd ignored, the belief that she could outwalk fear. And then, beneath it all, one question pounding louder than the flames: would she get out in time, or would Matt's revenge end here, in silence and smoke, before anyone even knew where to start looking? Noah's world collapsed in a way that felt cruelly symmetrical, as if fate itself had decided to mock him for every fragile hope he had dared to rebuild. Sharon's disappearance came barely hours after Sienna had been pulled out of Matt Clark's grasp, shaken but alive, and the timing alone was enough to hollow Noah out from the inside. He didn't need anyone to spell it out for him. The logic was brutal and unmistakable. Matt hadn't fled Genoa City in defeat, had shifted targets. The relief Noah had felt when Sienna was safe curdled almost instantly into nausea, because safety, he realized too late, was never something Matt allowed without extracting payment. Sharon was that payment. The thought tore through Noah with a violence that left him breathless, because beneath the panic and fear was a deeper, more corrosive emotion: guilt. Crushing, relentless guilt. He couldn't stop replaying the chain of events in his head, each decision now glowing red with consequence. If he hadn't brought Sienna into their lives, if he hadn't believed he could manage the danger, if he hadn't underestimated how deeply Matt thrived on revenge, Sharon wouldn't be missing. Matt wouldn't have returned to Genoa City with unfinished business burning in his veins. Noah told himself that intentions didn't matter, that outcomes were all that counted, and by that measure he had failed catastrophically as a son. Sharon had spent her life absorbing damage meant for others, and now she was paying for his choices. That realization hardened something in him. Grief didn't slow him down, it sharpened him into something reckless and unyielding. Noah made his decision quickly and without ceremony. He was going to find his mother, and nothing to fear, not logic, not family authority was going to stand in his way. Victor's warnings came first, delivered with the weight of experience and the quiet menace of a man who understood predators intimately. Victor spoke of strategy, of patience, of not rushing headlong into a trap designed to destroy exactly that kind of desperation. Nick followed, his voice raw, more personal, pleading rather than commanding, reminding Noah that Sharon needed him alive, not heroic and dead. But Noah heard their words as obstacles, not guidance. To him, caution felt like betrayal. Every minute spent debating was another minute Sharon spent alone with a man who had already proven he was capable of crossing lines without hesitation. Noah rejected the idea of waiting for law enforcement or security teams or carefully planned operations. He didn't want a plan, he wanted answers. He wanted Matt. Victor's eyes narrowed with concern as Noah brushed past him, because Victor recognized the look in his grandson's eyes all too well. It was the look of someone who believed he had nothing left to lose. Nick watched his son go with a knot in his chest that felt eerily familiar. The same helpless fear he'd felt too many times before when the people he loved walked straight toward danger, convinced that love alone would protect them. They both knew Noah was being reckless, but knowing it didn't give them a way to stop him. It only amplified their fear that history was about to repeat itself in the most devastating way possible. Noah tracked Matt not through brilliance, but through obsession. He followed fragments, rumors, patterns of behavior that only made sense if you understood Matt's psychology. Matt didn't hide because he was afraid. He hid because he wanted to be found on his terms. Noah sensed that and leaned into it, letting his own desperation become bait. When the confrontation finally came, it was raw and ugly, stripped of theatrics. Noah stood face to face with Matt Clark, the air between them thick with unspoken violence, and demanded Sharon's release with a fury that bordered on feral. He didn't threaten. He didn't negotiate. He simply insisted, as if sheer force of will could compel Matt to do the one thing he never did, willing let go of his leverage. Matt, blooded but unbowed, looked at Noah with something dangerously close to satisfaction. This was exactly what he had wanted, not just revenge, but proximity. He wanted Noah to see the cost of his defiance up close, to feel the weight of being powerless while someone you love hangs in the balance. Sienna's presence complicated everything. She tried to help Noah, tried to ground him, but guilt gnawed at her just as fiercely. She blamed herself for surviving, for being the reason Matt had a reason to return, for being the catalyst that put Sharon in the crosshairs. Her attempts to intervene only deepened the emotional chaos, because every word she spoke reminded Noah of the impossible arithmetic of this nightmare. One life saved, another endangered. Meanwhile, Sharon refused to become a passive victim in the story unfolding around her. Even injured and trapped, she listened, she observed, and she waited. The tension between Noah and Matt was volatile, and Sharon recognized it as an opportunity. Matt's attention fractured when Noah was near. His need to dominate clashed with his need to control the narrative. Sharon exploited that fracture with the quiet determination that had carried her through countless crises before. She tested restraints, measured time, conserved strength, and waited for the exact moment when Matt's focus slipped just enough. The confrontation escalated rapidly, fueled by Noah's refusal to back down and Matt's delight in pushing him closer to the edge. Every raised voice, every step forward, tightened the noose around the Newman family as a whole. Victor and Nick felt it even from a distant yet unmistakable sense that the family was teetering on the brink of catastrophe. That one misstep could shatter them irrevocably. Noah's recklessness, Matt's cruelty, Sharon's peril, and Sienna's guilt converged into a single, volatile point, threatening to explode with consequences no one could fully predict. The situation was no longer just about a kidnapping. It was about how far each person was willing to go, what they were willing to sacrifice, and whether love, once again, would prove to be a shield or the sharpest weapon Matt Clark could wield against them all.